This episode of Wheat Pete's Word is brought to you by Syngenta and the stacked cereals lineup for your wheat. It's time to plan your PGR. You've been managing for yield, so don't let your wheat go down for the count. Modus PGR applied at T1 can improve standability, harvestability, and yield. Visit syngenta.ca for more.
Good day and welcome to Wheat Pete's Word here at Real Agriculture for Wednesday, May the 7th. On this episode of the Word, it's go time, baby. Cool stuff. Yes, we're still lots of neat stuff out there. Some watch outs and then agronomy answers and some really, really interesting things that we're learning as we go along in 2025. Let's go. Yes, it's go time. Meanwhile, it's Mental Health Week, and I talked to a grower, and I so totally get this. He's quite particular. He really likes to do a good job, and I think many of us are like that. And he said to me, Pete, planting is the most stressful time of the year because do I plant? Is it too cold? Is it fit? And it generally always turns out fine. But wow, the stress level. It was April. It was sort of okay. Should we go? Is it too early? Now it's May. It's too wet. Oh, the stress level is through the roof. And so a couple of notes. First off, I get it because every time I go to the field to plant my own crop, I feel the exact same way in terms of is it fit enough or just what are the right conditions? And dang it all, I'm supposed to know. So I totally get that. Number two, it is Mental Health Week. So if it rains, you get a chance, or even if you're sitting in the tractor with auto steer on, call somebody, and I mean, if they're busy, they'll tell you, but gosh, keep reaching out with Wheat Pete's 15. The next thing on this is that we had a great discussion about the optimum planting date at the Exeter breakfast meeting Tuesday morning. And what's really good for farmers here in Ontario is that window for hitting the maximum yield is actually wider than we think. And oftentimes it relates to soil conditions as much as it does calendar date. So if you chose not to plant in April and now you're too wet and you maybe could have did it in April, don't worry. We really don't start losing significant yield until at least middle of May, even May 20th in many, many situations. And last but absolutely not least, here is Wheat Pete's advice for planting, not just in 2025, but in any year. And I've said this before, if it's fit, give her a shit. And just get that stuff in the ground. Meanwhile, the weather has been incredibly variable. Nature Nut Nick getting 25 millimeters, a full inch of rain, where other areas only, Ingersoll, where I live, we got 1/10. And growers were out in that Thorndale area on nice light soil. They were planting that afternoon. Nick's clay is going to take a while to be fit. So Nick isn't going to be able to give it for a few days yet. And so it really does come down to, it's variable. I talked to Mark from the south part of London, Lambeth area on Saturday, and that was the area that was so wet all of 2024. He's getting hammered again. He got 3.5 inches the previous week, and you just go, wowzers. So the weather, simply put, across Ontario is incredibly variable. So don't listen to the progress anywhere else. Check your own soil. If it's fit, you know what to do. Meanwhile, other places in the world, in Denmark and across Northern Europe, they are into a significant drought. They are extremely dry. The drought is 2 weeks ahead of their last significant dry or drought period, or drought year, I should say. It doesn't mean it'll continue to be dry, but oftentimes once it sets up that way, it tends to stay that way. Meanwhile, 2024 and 2023, they had record rainfall. we're hoping for a drought to get crop in the ground. Yeah, it's so dry, and that across Northern Europe, they're quite concerned from that standpoint. Meanwhile, if you look at the fusarium forecasting map in the U.S., they call it SCAB in the U.S., the scab risk or the fusarium risk throughout from Texas all the way up to Indiana, the fusarium risk in wheat, Mark, my good friend from Delmarva, says, look at that map, boy. She is screaming red hot for scab. So they are at very, very high fusarium risk in any of the wheat that is at the critical stage right now, and across that geography, there definitely will be some wheat at the critical stage. So they needed rain. They were extremely dry, but this rain does come with some other issues that might cause a little bit of grief down the road. Now, remember, it's a long way between heading and harvest, and things like high temperatures can stop fusarium in its tracks. So I'm not predicting that they'll have any trouble at all, but they certainly are at high risk right now. Hey, here's an incredibly cool story. So I've talked a bit about epigenetics from time to time, and a neat project out of Rothamsted and the University of Oxford in the UK. Apparently they've been working on this for 25 years. They finally got it to the point where it looks like they may be able to move it into commercialization. And recall that 90% of the things that we learn in science that work in the greenhouse or work in the lab never work when we take them out into the real world. So you always got to take this with a grain of salt. But this epigenetics, so we're just actually trying to change how the plant responds to its environment. We're not changing the genetics. Anyway, they call it sugar signaling, and in their early field trials, not laboratory now, field trials, it has increased wheat yields by 12%. So some really, really cool stuff that we continue to hear about as we move on. All right, let's go. I want to talk quickly about burn downs first. So yes, get the burn downs done. I talked about that, but I just want to remind you, because it came up again Tuesday morning, no Aragon before edible beans. We reach for Aragon ahead of soybeans on a regular basis in order to control the fleabane. That and metribuzin are the two compounds that we use on resistant fleabane, not ahead of edibles. Yeah, it's really, really a non-starter there. It's just going to do way too much damage on the edibles. On the 28% on wheat, really little burn, very, very little burn where we put our second or final application on our wheat crop, even where we had fairly high 28% rates, like much less burn in 2025 than we got in 2024 or in 2023, which is incredibly intriguing. What it means is that the cuticle on the wheat crop is fairly thick and waxy, or we would see more burn. Now, that's a great thing for the wheat crop. But when it comes to our burn downs, if the cuticle is thick on the wheat crop, there is a pretty good chance it's also probably thicker on the weeds. And so make sure you do the absolute best job you can when you do that burn down program. Use your surfactants, keep your rates right, use the right water volumes, all of those things, because it looks like we could struggle a bit. And remember, the dandelions are in full flower. In fact, gosh, fall weed control, I know I talk about this so much, but where I walk wheat fields that had fall weed control, there is almost no dandelions, almost no fleabane. The annual weeds, I will say, are coming gangbusters. Fortunately, annual weeds generally don't cause much trouble in winter wheat. But if you're in your burn down process, man, the annual weeds are just thick, thick, thick in some fields. So pay attention to that. But that fall weed control, the wheat looks gorgeous. I came past some winter wheat fields that did not have fall weed control, and actually had a grower with me, looked at the field and said, "Is that canola?" It was an absolute yellow mat of dandelions, and I'll guarantee you, you can spray it now. It's revenge spraying, the damage is done, and you have lost at least 25 bushels per acre of wheat in that wheat crop with that kind of dandelion pressure. Fall weed control just pays back big dividends. Okay, I've talked about that enough. Hey, cobra chickens, otherwise known as Canada geese, in eastern Ontario, along the St. Lawrence Seaway, along Lake Ontario, man, they just seem to be all sorts of damage. They keep clipping the wheat crop off. According to the research done by Gilles Cannell, when he worked with the Ministry of Agriculture and Food, every time the geese clip that wheat off, you lose 1 day in maturity, which is probably also somewhere in the range of 4 bushels of wheat yield. And if they chew it off enough times, they will kill it. There's only so much root reserve that wheat crop has. On the upside, the red clover stands in winter wheat crop look absolutely phenomenal. So that is kind of cool. All right, next, Nick, sending me a great question. And for once, I mean, Nature Nut Nick generally sends questions that Pete just shakes his head and says, Nick, come on. Like, that's a tough question. I have no clue. But this time, yeah, he sent me a question I think I can actually answer. And what's really cool about this is that Nick is using the data and thinking through the process, his critical thinking skills. So Nick's YEN, Yield Enhancement Network in wheat, he soil tested. I talked about that before. It was cool because the soil test came back roughly the same or almost exactly the same as 3 years ago. A phosphorus test of 35, so that's in the sweet spot. It's at the high end of the sweet range, if you would. Typically, I say 20 to 35 is the goal for phosphorus, and 150 for potash. So again, like if we're 120 to 150, unless you're an alfalfa producer, so he's right at the high end. He does his tissue sample at growth stage 31, and it comes back marginal for phosphorus and excellent for potash. And Nick's question is, come on, Pete, the soil test says I'm bang on for both phosphorus and potash, but the tissue sample says I'm lacking some phosphorus. What's going on? And it's all about the difference in the nutrients and how they're taken up. So yes, you have ample soil phosphorus, but remember that soil phosphorus is and soil phosphorus availability is quite related to soil temperature. Phosphorus is 5 times more available in the soil at 25 degrees Celsius than it is at 5 degrees Celsius. So soil temperatures are 5 degrees Celsius, that phosphorus isn't very available. And part of the reason is that we rely on the biology in the soil quite a bit to help the plant get phosphorus. You know, the arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi that are synergistic with the roots of many plants, they help the plant pick up phosphorus. Yeah. When it's cold, they aren't working. And so even though you have adequate phosphorus, your soil temperatures are meaning that the plant, it's not below critical level for phosphorus by any means, but it's not up where you would expect it to be given that soil test. Meanwhile, potash is totally mass flow uptake. When the soil is wet, more potash is available. That water moves to the plant root. It helps it move. I mean, it's a cation. It doesn't move that far, but at least we have enough to be able to move it through diffusion and get it to that root. And so that diffusion process, more potash available, the plant can get lots, and we're not short at all. In fact, all 4 boxes were blue on the potash. So that's kind of a cool thought process. Brad in Lambton County, who sent me lots of pictures of, Pete, look at the nitrogen striping in my wheat crop, sent me some pictures and said, yes, we've had enough rainfall now that there is no longer nitrogen striping in the wheat crop. It looks this dark green, almost blue-green, and gorgeous, and it's going to go. And as I just described, I believe, last episode, that's all about, again, water movement in the soil, and that nitrogen needs water in a heavy clay soil in order to be able to move and get to those wheat roots. But what really astounds me about nitrogen, so there's a great sprayer malfunction plot near Clinton that I drove past and I dug into. And all the way across the field, there were 10-foot strips that were clearly pale green versus the balance of the field looked gorgeous. And what happened was that the solenoid that controlled the boom right behind the sprayer, the self-propelled sprayer, 10 feet wide, it didn't turn on, and nothing on the monitor told the operator that, so no way to tell because it's behind the sprayer. I mean, there's a shout out for cameras to show you what's happening behind the sprayer, but regardless, what astounded me in that particular situation was, the auto steering in that sprayer must really work well, because it was right to the line, 10-foot wide strips all the way across the field. It did not vary an inch. It was like, wow, how could you ever be that precise? But it really does show you that nitrogen does not cross past wheat roots, because the water is taken up by that row of wheat plants, and that nitrogen never gets past it. And what's really cool is that the grower is going to try to get some yield data to see just whether or not those 10-foot strips actually suffered from a yield standpoint or not. All right, well, we're on that. James out of Wisconsin saying, hey, Peter, I got a new farm. It hasn't been farmed for 5 years. Man, Wisconsin must be different than Ontario. I can't think of many farms that don't get farmed every year in this part of the world, but cool. Silt loam soil, so gorgeous soil, but no drainage, so very wet. And his question is, it's rented land. I do not want to build the fertility. I'm going to grow triticale forage. What's the fertility program? I'm thinking 100 pounds of DAP in the furrow or in the seed trench with the seed, 150 pounds of urea, and that's it, full stop. So great thought process, James. When you look at the data, on forage triticale, you really want 90 pounds of nitrogen. You get 18 from the DAP, 100 pounds of DAP. You put the phosphorus in the furrow, you're going to get that early growth boost. I think you're bang on. 150 pounds of urea gives you almost 70 plus 18, you're at 88. And so we're basically at our 90 pounds that we want. The one thing I would say is that sulfur. You did not mention sulfur. I expect that forage triticale is going to need some sulfur. I'd be looking to find a way to put 10 pounds of sulfur with that as well. Well, we're on that. Brett saying, Peter, phosphorus soil test of 19. Should I broadcast some phosphorus when I do my broadcast fertility program on corn this spring, or do I just run 6-24-6 in furrow? So, Brett, I've said this before. I think most growers are already saying it, but broadcast phosphorus does not work on corn. Full stop. Save your money. Use the 6-24-6 in furrow. That's going to give you the boost you need. If you want to build that phosphorus soil test, 19 is not bad, but you want to build it, do it some other time. Or you can build it now, but just know that the corn crop is not going to respond. All right, we're going to move on to fungicides. And Bob with a great question. So, Peter, what about fungicides on Timothy hay? I've never done it, but I'm wondering, we've had trouble with standability. Would fungicides help that Timothy crop stand better and not lodge as much? And so, absolutely, if the reason the Timothy is lodging is disease related, then a fungicide could help with that. Be careful, because Headline or Preach are the only fungicides that are registered in Timothy in Eastern Canada. And remember that whenever you use a fungicide on a forage crop, and this is true with Preaxor on alfalfa, so here's the heads up for growers thinking about putting Preaxor on their alfalfa to save those bottom leaves, get better quality alfalfa. You have to apply that fungicide a minimum of 21 days before you harvest the forage, or the crop doesn't have a long enough period to benefit from the application of that fungicide. So 21 days before harvest, and if you're going to do it, that's the real key to that whole process. Meanwhile, powdery mildew in wheat. So there's some Twitter chats starting, or some Twitter posts, I should say, with very heavy powdery mildew in wheat. In fact, I scouted some wheat a few days ago. Typically, wheat peat is not a T1 fungicide or T1.5 fungicide person. I only want to do it if I have heavy pressure from a disease. Yeah, I scouted fields that had powdery mildew just out the yin-yang, and we recommended a fungicide in that situation. Meanwhile, 90% of the wheat that I scout is clean from a disease perspective. So mildew is the issue right now. Scout your wheat. It looks like it is only present in the highly susceptible varieties. So all that data is available at gocrops.ca in the cereals section, and you know your variety, your wheat variety, look down there, you can see whether or not it's highly susceptible. All right, 2 quick things before I'm done. 1, bluegrass. Man, lots of bluegrass starting to show up, or showing up more and more as weed issues. Mike Cobra has some excellent information on Field Crop News that you should have a look at. What's really interesting is they have some glyphosate-resistant annual ryegrass. Man, if it's glyphosate-resistant, it looks like Assure, the FOPS of the Group 1 chemistry, does not have as good of efficacy as some of the DIMs like clethodim or Select. And that's a really interesting kind of not cross resistance per se, because the FOPs still have activity, but not as good activity. Meanwhile, if it's susceptible, it actually is the other way around. And that is really, really interesting information. So go to Field Crop News, have a look at that. And the other one is on sulfur. Still lots of sulfur discussion out there. A great discussion about sulfur. I've pushed ammonium sulfate over ammonium thiosulfate. Alex put ammonium sulfate on his wheat crop on April the 13th, got no rainfall, and it went yellow. Meanwhile, his neighbors used ammonium thiosulfate. Now, they would have put that in with some added nitrogen, so a little bit more nitrogen there, but that crop went dark green and just took off. And Alex, no rain. So in Eastern Canada, we are not used to positional unavailability of applied fertilizer because we almost always get rain. In Western Canada, they're very familiar with it. It happens all the time. It's one of the challenges why I can't get Western growers to very often use split nitrogen, because they can't count on water to get that nitrogen into the soil. But you've gotten rain now. Alex has gotten rain now. His wheat crop has corrected. But as much as I think we have better availability of that sulfate as opposed to the thiosulfate, if it doesn't get into the soil, yep, it just isn't going to work. Really, really interesting stuff. And with that, that's it. That's all. On behalf of the team here at Real Agriculture, this is Wheat Pete with the word for Wednesday, the 7th of May. Hey, if it's fit, give it shit. And I hope for you, it's fit this next week and you get lots done. Hey, we will talk to you next Wednesday. See you then.
Thank you for downloading this episode of Wheat Pete's Word, brought to you by Syngenta and the Stacked Cereals lineup. Growing winter wheat? Protect your yield with Miravis Neo fungicide with its long-lasting, powerful curative and preventative leaf disease management. Deal your wheat a winning hand with Miravis Neo for septorial leaf blotch, tan spot, and more. Talk to your retailer or visit syngenta.ca.